Hey y'all, what is up? It is Beth. This is my March wrap up. I read a total of 15 books in March, and I was gonna have this little fun fact. I was gonna say, and fun fact, so many of those were on my, I'm gonna go count how many were on my physical TBR, and I'm gonna come back with that fun fact, so please hold. So 11 out of the 15 books that I've read have came from my shelves, and for that, because we are trying to get our shelves read this year, get our shelves in shape, get them duds, get them out, get them out, get them out. I say that because a handful of the books that I read in a handful of the books that I read in March were duds, and I will be unhauling them, and I'll show you which ones those are here in a second, okay? But first, I want to update you on my book blanket. I don't think I talked about it in my February wrap up, but I did talk about it in my January wrap up. Essentially, really quick, if you don't know what a book blanket is, do you know what a temperature blanket is? It's like a crochet blanket, and each row of the blanket correlates with the temperature of the day. And so at the end of the year, you'll have 365 rows on that blanket, and each row is like the high temperature of that day. Okay, so a book blanket is, for instance, if I read 150 books this year, I will wind up with 150 rows. Each row is a color. Each color correlates with the star rating. I do, in general, rate books with 0.5s sometimes, but whatever the Goodreads rating is what I'm doing, because I wasn't going to keep up with like 10 colors or whatever. So I just did 5 colors, and I caught up. I got January through March done, and I wanted to show you, so please hold. So I went with the Granny Stripe blanket. This yarn feels very old. It's new. Like, I bought it new. It just feels old. And so like this blanket, when I hold it, it just reminds me of like old blankets at my grandmother's house, or blankets when I was a child. My mom had a bunch of these, because I do have other blankets that I'm working on with like not old feeling yarn. This is like the Big Twist brand, and it just feels very cozy. It was pretty cheap, but anyway. This very bottom row is my very first book that I read in January, and so it goes up from there. So I read a 3-star book, which is why that row is orange, and then I read a series. I binge read a series, and it was a 5-star series. So I just did a 5-star chunk for each of those books. And then green is a 2-star, blue is a 4-star, and so forth and so on. And we're caught up. I finished a 2-star book yesterday, and this is what it is looking like. So I will link everything down below when it comes to the blanket. So I'll link the yarn that I use, the hook that I use, and the YouTube tutorial that I followed to create the blanket. If you're interested and you want to make your own, you do not have to use the same yarn that I used. The yarn that I am using feels very old, but like in a good way and like a comfy way. But I know that might not be some people's vibes, but I'll still link it down below in case you we're curious. Crocheting is game-changing when it comes to listening to audiobooks. I crochet and cross stitch and diamond paint a lot when I listen to audiobooks, because I find that if I keep my hands busy, I can soak up and remember more of the story. It's wild how that works, but it just works. And that's a little tip-a-rooney for you. And now that we've talked about my book blanket, we can go ahead and dive in to the 15 books that I read in the month of March. And the very first one is right here. It feels weird because it feels like I read this book months ago. It hasn't even been a full month. And that is The Institute by Stephen King. I'm slowly getting through his backlist. I've probably read about 25 of his books now. Still got about 40 to go. Still got a long way to go. And I've been wanting to read this one because this is a lot of people's favorites. This is a lot of people's favorites when it comes to Stephen King. I do feel like a lot of Stephen King's work is kind of across the board. For me, he has some like 5-star bangers, and then he has like some 2, 3, 1-star duds. You just gotta read to figure out what vibe of his you're gonna enjoy. So this one, if I were doing a video of like, if you love this show, you should read this book, pretend like that's what we're doing. If you love Stranger Things, read this book. So this book follows, for the most part, a child named Luke. And Luke is at home with his parents. He's getting ready to go to this really bougie school because he is a very smart child, in the sense that, like, I want to say he's like 14, something around there, 13, 14. And he's already about ready to go to college, about ready to go to Yale, like about ready to go to Harvard. He is super intelligent, but he also has a gift of telekinesis. He doesn't know that he has this. He just thinks every once in a while he can accidentally move something with his mind, but he doesn't really think too far into it, you know, because like, who has time for that when you're such a smart kid? So one night he's going to bed and he falls asleep. He wakes up and he's in this place that kind of looks like his room, but like there's no windows. It just kind of feels like, you know what I mean? And so he opens the door and he's greeted with this long hallway of all these other rooms that house all these other kids that also have either telekinesis or telepathy. Essentially, now he's locked up in this institute, and these very sick, grown people are using these children. Anyway, this book was great. Fantastic. The thing that I love the most about Stephen King is his character work, his character development. I am such a character-driven reader. I want to know everything about these characters. I want to be in their heads. I want to know when their birthday is. I want to know what their birthstone is. And Stephen King is one of the authors that does that. That's why a lot of his books are so meaty. That's just how I'm wording that. That's what it is. That's why I like Stephen King's books. Sometimes. He does have duds. Let's just get that out there. He does have some duds. But this was not one of those. This is a 4.5. That's what I rated it. And we're moving on. Look, do not be like me. I went and got a haircut last month and I was like, yes, girl, give me bangs. And so that's why I've been having these weird hairstyles, because I have all of the regrets. So if you see hairs accidentally come undone, you do not see them. So the next book that I read, Fixer Up by Tessa Bailey. I'm gonna tell you what, the very first Tessa Bailey book that I read was It Happened One Summer, and I loved it. I loved it. This was at a time where I probably was reading like 2 romance books a year. I was not like into the romance genre. So I didn't really have much to go off of. I just knew that I loved it. And I did feel like the main female character was very childish, and there was insta love, especially with the guy character. The talk in the sexy time scenes was kind of cringy, but I just kind of was like, maybe this is whatever. And then I tried to read another Sarah Dessen book. Nope. Wow, Sarah Dessen. Where are you coming from? Then I tried Then I tried to read another Tessa Bailey book, and it was very insta-lovey. Like, literally the second page, they were already obsessed with each other. The girl was very childish. I DNF'd it at like 50 pages in, right? And then I tried to read another one, and again, it was very insta-lovey. Couldn't handle it. I DNF'd it about halfway through. And so I don't know if she's gonna be a one-hit wonder for me. I don't know. Part of me is like, Beth, you need to reread It Happened One Summer to see if it still even stands anymore, because I read Fixer Up, babe. No, Nene. This is insta-lovey to the extreme. And first off, let me just tell you what. I'm just gonna start telling you what I hated about this book, and then we're gonna move on. So we have our main chick. I don't even remember her name. Georgette. She was obsessed with her brother's friend when she was a child. And she was literally a child when her brother was friends with him in high school, because there's an age gap. She was probably like 11, 12-ish, and he was a high schooler, and she was in love with him, right? Right out of high school, he moves away, okay? So he moves away, she's still like 12, 13. Still a child. She is in love with him though, through the TV screen, because he's a professional baseball player. So then when he moves back years later, and she's now like in her early 20s, and he's, you know, been playing professional baseball all this time, and he moves back, she's still in love with him. And the whole family's like, yeah, she's been in love with you her whole life. She literally only met you when she was a kid. She doesn't know you as an adult. She was a child. Please make that make sense. That's gross. That's cringy. But whatever. So she's in love with you. And then he calls her his friend's kid sister. My friend's kid sister. My friend's, you're just my friend's little sister. You're just my best friend's little sister. You're just my friend's kid sister. Like the whole, like 75% in the book. That's what he keeps referring to her as. And she's a virgin, which no offense if you're a virgin, but Tessa Bailey made sure to tell us 25 times that she's a virgin. Okay? And it's just kind of weird to me, because then like when they were doing the nasty, okay, she was like, how do I know when I'm about to... But literally, at the very beginning of the book, y'all humped, and you know? And you're obsessed with sex toys and you watch porn all the time and you don't know, like, that didn't make sense to me. That was kind of cringe. It was a complete flop. A complete flop. Complete flop. I'll be unhauling that book. I gave it a 2-star. So I also am going to mention that I'm unhauling the second book. The second book is about a woman named Rosie, who was also in the first book, and she is the most boring character ever in the first book. I don't really care to read it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and unhaul window shopping on top of that. I've heard such horrible things about this book anyway. Maybe if you read romance books just for the things, then maybe you'll like this. But that's not me. But I did vlog, like, reading the last half of that book in my, what was it called? Backlist Readathon vlogs. The very first one, if you want to go check that out. But speaking of the Backlist Readathon, the next handful of books I read during the Backlist Readathon. So I have vlogged about all of these books. The first one I don't have a physical copy of, but it is Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I listened to this on audio, and boy oh boy, I wish I had this in physical copy, because though this isn't like some, I don't know, masterpiece, something telling you how to accomplish life. It's literally just Matthew McConaughey talking about things that he has gone through in his life. But man, oh man, oh man, I wish I had a physical copy, because there were so many quotes in this book that just like hit the nail on the head, and I wanted to highlight, I wanted to tab it, to use them as Instagram quotes. Like, they're that good. My all-time favorite movie is How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. So like, automatically going into this, I knew it was gonna be a banger, because like, it's Matthew McConaughey, like, let's be real. But yeah, it's a banger. It is a banger. Okay, up next I read The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. This is a romance as well. This is more of like a chick lit type romance book, and we have these two characters. So he is a nurse, like a hospice nurse, and she is a, I don't remember what she is. Oh, I don't remember. But she's going through this bad breakup. She needs to move out of her ex-boyfriend's house, and she cannot afford to live on her own, essentially. And so she's looking for a roommate, and he needs extra money. So he's looking for someone that can stay in his apartment. He works the night shift, and then he's home only like through the hours of 9 to 6 or something like that. And so he's looking for someone who works those hours, so then they will be home when he's gone. You know what I mean? So like, they'll live together, but they won't ever see each other kind of situation, whatever. And they become close through leaving notes around the house and text messages and stuff, and whatever. Anyway, it's just so good. I rated it 4.5 stars, but it's not like a 4.5 star fantastic romance. It's gonna give you the butterflies and make you kick your feet kind of thing. I rated it 4.5 stars because I really appreciate how the author wrote about having PTSD after a horrible narcissistic gaslit relationship that this character went through. Just something that needs to be brought up more, especially in the romance genre, honestly. And for that, I appreciated this book so much more than I would have had it just been another Tessa Bailey situation. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then the next book that I read was The Lost Girls of Willowbrook. This is a historical fiction mystery book. I still tack on thriller because the second half of this book felt pretty thriller-like to me, okay? But I read this in the Backlist Readathon, and I read it because Jacqueline read it. And I feel like Jacqueline and I have really, really opposite tastes in reading for the most part, and she read it and she disliked it. And I was just like, you know what? While we're here doing this together, I'm gonna put it to the test. And I read it and I really enjoyed it. Now, before you go into this book, I do think that you'll benefit from actually reading about the Willowbrook Hospital and just reading what actually went down in the 70s. I feel like it'll make you appreciate the story more, and you'll be able to know like what was fact and what was fiction in this story, because it is a fictional story. It was just, they pulled some true things from the actual Willowbrook place from the 70s. Anyway, in this story, we have two sisters that were twins, or are twins, and one of them was sent to this school when she was a child, But the other twin that we're actually following, I don't remember, Rosemary and Sage. So we're following Sage, and Rosemary was put in the school when she was a child. Sage was told that Rosemary passed away. So it had been 6 years, and this whole time Sage thought her sister died from pneumonia many years ago. Her stepdad gets a phone call saying Rosemary's missing at the school, and that's how Sage finds out that she had been lied to this whole time, and her sister was actually alive but now missing. So Sage goes to the school to figure out what's going on, why she was lied to, and see if she can help find her sister. She left to the school after coming home from an all-night drunken bender. So she's already like hungover, looking a hot mess. This is also in the 70s, so like cell phones and stuff are not a thing, right? And she's in high school, so she doesn't have like a driver's license and a car and whatever. So she shows up there already looking toe up because of that, and they think, oh, well, this is Rosemary coming back from her little play. You know what I mean? They're like, this is the girl. So they lock her up thinking that she's the twin sister that had ran off. And so this whole time, the whole first half of the book is essentially Sage trying to convince anyone and everyone that she is not, in fact, Rosemary. She is Sage. And then it just kind of goes buck wild after that. And I don't want to really tell you anything about it because that's like where the thriller part comes in. You just got to make it through halfway in the book. And then there's this one person that's like, I believe you. And then shit starts happening, okay? Yeah, I gave it 4 stars because I enjoyed it. There are some things in this book that I absolutely love when it comes to thrillers, but I enjoyed it on like a popcorn thriller level, if that makes sense. So it's not like an all-time favorite thriller. It's not, I probably won't buy it to put on my shelves kind of thing, but I did enjoy it and I do recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. This is like Confessions. Let me tell you something about this book. This book is 6 chapters long. These chapters are very long, the first chapter being the longest. So I started this book and I got to end of the chapter 1 and I was just like not really vibing with it. I started chapter 2 and it was just like confusing. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And so I mentioned that in the Discord of the readathon, and somebody was also reading the book and they were like, you just need to keep on. And so I was like, you know what, actually I'm gonna rewind, start over. I didn't start fully over, but I like went a lot back, probably to middle of chapter 1. And I really paid attention this time because I was like, there's so many people love this book. I'm missing something, right? And I definitely was. I definitely was, because I didn't know, it does say it on the back, but I didn't read the back when I was diving into this. But I feel like for you to actually understand the book going into this and not wanting to DNF, that you need to know each chapter is said in somebody else's perspective. Every chapter is in a different person's perspective. There are 6 chapters in here. You're getting 6 different people's perspective on something that happens in this book. So in this book, in the first chapter, we have this teacher. It is like the last day of the semester and she is telling essentially her kids goodbye. I'm leaving here because of something that happened. My daughter was murdered and the murderer is actually in this classroom and I'm gonna get my revenge, whatever. So here's me signing off, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to say too much, essentially. But like, oh my gosh, the way that this book was told is what makes this book a 5-star. It is so good. And it's like really short. I can't really say much about it because then I feel like I'm gonna give too much away. So you're just gonna have to trust me and read it. And just, it's so good. It's a 5-star. So good. All right, and then the next book that I read was The Crucifix Killer by Chris Carter. I read for the readathon as like my 5-star prediction for the prompt. And then I also read this for my book club, which is a serial killer themed book club over on Fable. This is the start of a series, but the actual crime that's going on in this book, it does end in this book, if that makes sense. I digress. This is a crime thriller. So our main character is a police officer, and there is a serial killer that supposedly was caught 2 years ago. A woman has been found in this cottage in LA that has the carvings, which is like the signature of that serial killer, and was like brutally tortured, her skin ripped off her face, all this, that, and the other. And so the cop's like, well, his name is Robert. He's like, well, did we catch the wrong person? Or is there a copycat? Like, what's going on? And so this case is reopened. A serial killer is on the loose. Multiple people die throughout this. The thing thing that I love, because like, if you didn't know, these types of thrillers, these crime thrillers, are my favorite types of thrillers because one, they read like I'm watching an episode of Criminal Minds or NCIS or CSI or whatever to me, and two, they're much darker than these drama-filled, rich wife, husband's cheating on me kind of thrillers, because you get the crime scenes, you get the perspective of the cops, and then in some of these, not this one particularly, but in some of these crime thrillers, you get the perspective of the actual killer as well, or the victims, or what have you. In this one, you do get some chapters in the actual victims before stuff goes down. I gave it 5 stars. And I'm not saying that because it's like the next best American novel. I'm saying that because I had such a fun time sleuthing away in this book. That's another thing, is I like trying to figure it out with the cops, you know, like with the detectives or whoever it is that's being the sleuth. And I just had such a fun time. I did vlog myself reading this again with the Backlist Readathon books. I gave it 5 stars. And I loved it. I will be continuing on in the series. What sucks about this series is this author, I want to say, is like UK based, and their books are just really hard to find here in America, especially in hardback. It doesn't have to be a hardback, but I just prefer whatever. Let's not talk about that. Anyway. And then I listened to a really short audiobook, and though I read this for the Backlist Readathon, it didn't snap into my noggin that this was a new release. It definitely was not Backlist. So I kind of cheated. But I read Lucinda Berry's newest audiobook. This is not in print. Like, it's literally only available via the audio format. One of our own. I rated this 4 stars, and it is a short story. So go into it knowing that. I do rate my short stories a little differently than I rate my long books, because you can't get the full character development and the full, like, you know what I mean? Like, because it's such a short story. I will say, however, the person who narrated this, the main person, is AJ Cook, who plays in Criminal Minds, which also could have swayed me a little bit. But if you've read a Lucinda Berry book and you enjoyed it, you definitely will enjoy this one as well, because it has that Lucinda Berry vibe. If you know, you know. So our main character in this book is a lawyer by day, but also works at this suicide prevention hotline at nighttime, and she's volunteering, gets this phone call from this girl who really wants to unalive herself, and it's just her. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's a short story. Like, you can't really go into more depth. Anyway, I enjoyed it. It was quick. It is what it is, okay? And then I read Too Good to Be True by Carola Lovering. And I read this book in my vlog, first episode of my bookshelf ultimatum. So if you've seen that, you already know my thoughts on this book. But really quickly, this book is a thriller, but I would say it leans more heavily toward a romance kind of suspense book. If even that. This book to me is just a joke. That's where it should be categorized at on Goodreads. It's a joke. So in this book, we get 3 different perspectives. We get Sky, who is just now getting engaged to her boyfriend, Burke. And the only way I can remember his name is I kept having to remind myself of Burke's Outlet. I don't know if those are everywhere, but they're here in the South. And so she has been battling with some crippling OCD ever since her mother died many years ago. It's been hard for her to find like a good relationship because of that, until she meets Burke. Well, then we get a second perspective, and that is of old Berkey Burke. Oh, Berkey Burke. Berkey Burke is already married, okay? He's married to this woman named Heather, and they've been married for 25 years. And Burke has a scheme, something that he's doing, okay? He's using Sky, essentially. That is not a spoiler, that is in the synopsis. And then we get Heather's perspective, which is Burke's wife. So the Sky perspective is the here and now. The Burke perspective is like a year ago when he was first meeting Sky. You're getting to see why he's doing what he's doing, what have you. And then we get Heather's perspective back in the 80s when she was just getting with Burke, and like, it all makes sense in the end. It's kind of convoluted. The book is a joke, okay? I hated this book. 2 stars. I gave it 2 stars, and I will be unhauling it. So let's go ahead and toss it over there with the Tessa Bailey books. And then I read Night Will Find You in that same reading vlog, and this is on the opposite side of Too Good to Be True in the sense that I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This is another thriller, mystery, suspense novel. And in this book, we follow a woman named Vivi. Vivi is a scientist, but when she was younger, as a child, she kind of had this vision that in the long run, saved her best friend. So she was a child, he's a few years older than her, and he would walk to school every day in front of their house, and she had like this dream that he was killed by a blue horse. And she tried to warn him every single day, and it got annoying to him, and he had to get his parents involved and this, that, and the other. Lo and behold, a blue Mustang going down the road and almost kills him. Old Vivi saved his life. Like, she literally like tackled him to the ground so he wouldn't get killed. Fast forward, they're best friends. They're grown-ass people. He actually likes to get her help to help solve some cases because he's now a police officer. She's a scientist. She doesn't live in her hometown anymore, but she does come back. She's specifically back in town because her mother passed away, and her mother was a psychic, okay? And so she comes back to town and tries to help with these like cases that they're working on. And sometimes she gets it right and sometimes she doesn't, but they just like to, you know, whatever. So they have all this stuff laid out on the table, and she's like picking stuff up to see if she can sense anything. And then she picks up this hair bow, and she just gets this overwhelming feeling that the little girl is still alive. It was a 10-year-old case though. So like it had been a cold case for so many years. But the chief of police is like, let's go with it. Let's go with it. I need this case solved. So he sends this guy, this other cop, to help her out, and they're working together to solve this case, essentially. And like I said before, I prefer thrillers where there's cases being solved, where there's detectives, whether it be like an actual cop, which there was in this book. There is an actual cop, but our main character's not a cop. But she does have her detective hat on. You know what I'm saying? She's doing the sleuthing. And I really love that. But I gave it 4.5 stars. Up next, we have The Winter Sister. So I picked this book up and the next book or two up off my shelves because I'm trying to get through some books that honestly, low-key, I know they're gonna be duds. But I was like, let me go ahead and read it. Let me listen to the audiobook while I work on my crochet blanket. So I kind of picked this up knowing this was going to be a dud. Because, like, let's be real. I've owned this book since 2019. This was my very first Book of the Month pick when I first signed up with Book of the Month. I'm not signed up with them anymore, but that's how long I've owned this book. I finally read it. This one falls into the same category as Too Good to Be True in the sense that this is heavy on the romance. And I'm just, But the thing is, there's one, okay, so... Remind me to tell you what the thing is, okay? So in this book, what do we even have? 16 years ago, Sylvie's sister Persephone was murdered, okay? Like, the case has been cold this entire time. Persephone's boyfriend at the time has been like the biggest suspect this whole time. We all, obviously, he didn't do it if we have an entire book trying to prove that. This book sucks. So that's all I'm gonna tell you. But there is that one part. It's not a spoiler, like, whatever. I'm not recommending this book. If you want to read this book, like if you're or want to read this book, then mute it. It's not a spoiler, but whatever. In this book, Sylvie does the nasty with her sister's boyfriend, okay? But it's been years though. Her sister's been dead all these years, but they wind up falling in love. And they do the nasty. And she's like thinking in her monologue, she's like, I lost my sister so many years ago, and his penis is going inside of me, and he's connected to my sister. So he is essentially pushing my sister back inside of me. And immediately after I read that line, I knew I was gonna hate this book. Whatever. I gave it 2 stars, and I'm also unhauling this one. The next book I read for Elizabeth from Reading Riley for her book club, the Midnight Society book club, and that is in the And Then There Was Silence by Candace Robinson. Now on Goodreads, this is shelved as a horror. So when I picked this up, I was going into this as a horror. If I personally were to shelve this myself, I would say this is a supernatural type romance. Very poorly written. Okay. It reminds me of like back in 2010, 2012, when we would all read like Hush Hush. Or you know, like all those books with the girls on the cover in the gothic dress covering their face, and it was like a paranormal romance. That's what this book reminds me of. Anyway, so this book is about a woman named Sadie Hawkins, and she's married to this guy, and they're very, very hardcore into like the horror movie world. And the guy, for a living, he builds like these sculptures, these very haunted looking animal skull type sculptures. And then she writes screenplays and short stories and stuff like that. He winds up unaliving himself. Okay, the author wrote their relationship to the, like, I truly believe like they were really made for each other, meant for each other. And so that was very heartbreaking, and she took it very hard. Well, on her 24th birthday, she gets a letter in the mail that was written by her husband River, who passed away 3 months ago. But he had it like planned out to where on her 24th birthday, she would get this letter in the mail, and she was supposed to like meet him at this cabin that he bought for her. Because this cabin, couples that have lived there before have killed themselves. Like, it's been like a murder-suicide situation multiple times, right? And so she was like intrigued by that. And so he bought it for her. And so she's like, you know what, I'm gonna move there. But when she moves there, so many things are happening. Seeing black figures moving in the woods, and like trees themselves moving when there's no wind, or wind's going and the trees are not moving. Just like random weird spooky things are happening, and you don't really know if it is the trauma that is messing with Sadie's mind because she is so depressed from losing her husband, or is it really something in the woods. And that's as far as I'm gonna go with it. I'm not going to tell you, it's really hard to talk about this book and like tell you the reasons why I disliked it without going into spoilers, but just know this book is a 2-star. It probably deserves like a 1.5 star if we're being truly honest. So that's just my opinion on this book. Ding! I'm also unhauling this one. We're almost done. Second to the last book. This is another book, a thriller that I had on my shelf that I was like, let me go ahead and get this one read because it's probably going to be a dud as well. But spoiler alert, it is not. I enjoyed this one. So this is When I Was You by Amber Garza. It says You meets Fatal Attraction. And as I was reading this book, I definitely was getting vibes of You. The book You by Carolyn Katniss. I've never watched Fatal Attraction, so I don't really know about that, but in this up all night story of suspicion, obsession, and motherhood, definitely what that is. So we have Kelly Medina, and she is in her 40s. She's been married for a long time. She has a son that's in college, and her husband works also at a college but doesn't live with her. He comes home occasionally. The college town that he works in is a bougie town, and they couldn't afford to live there. So she's home alone all the time. Well, one day she gets this phone call from her son's pediatrician. Well, her son's like in college. He's a grown man. And so the pediatrician's like, hey, we're just calling about your appointment for your new baby. And she's like, that's not me. And the pediatrician was like, oh, that's funny that you have the same exact name. It must have been mixed up in the system. Well, Kelly starts really focusing on this other chick that has the same exact name as her. And she finds out then, like later on, that Kelly also goes to the same gym as her. She has a son. She's about the same age when she had her son. Blah, 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 blah. She becomes obsessed. When Kelly just happens to bump into the single mother outside of that pediatrician's office, because the pediatrician told her when the appointment was, and so that's how she was able to bump into her. So their unlikely friendship brings Kelly a renewed sense of purpose, taking care of this young woman and her adorable baby boy, but that friendship quickly turns to obsession, and one of those Kellys winds up disappearing, and the other one may know why. It's very popcorn thrillery, but like in such a good way. In such a good way. It's definitely not my normal vibe of thriller. However, I had such a good time. I was like drawn into the story. I did not want it to end. I was like, yes, give me the drama, give me the tea, what's going on, what's happening. And at first I was like, man, there's gonna be a lot of plot holes because I feel like she's skipping over a bunch of stuff. But no, it all crumbles down in the end, and like you get to know why everything, I don't know. I gave it 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars or 3 stars or 3.5 stars. Like, I feel like this is such a good popcorn thriller. So this one is staying. on my shelves, and I'm glad I finally picked it up. Okay, and then my last book, a book that I actually picked up and read fully yesterday because it's a very short book. It's a thriller. Another thriller that I was like, let me go ahead and get that one read too. I have read another book by this author and I hated the book. I gave it 2 stars. It was just such a horrible time. I only finished it. But typically, the reason why I don't give a lot of books 1 stars is because if I have a feeling that it's going to be a 1 star, 9 out of 10 times I'm just going to DNF it. I am not going to force myself to read a 1. You know what I mean? Okay, and this has a very high rating on Goodreads. So if this is your favorite book that I'm about to shit on, I'm sorry. The Arrangement by Kirsten Modulin. So this book, we have a husband and a wife. Their marriage is not doing so great. And so, like, they've been to therapy, they've tried this, that, and the other, nothing is working. So the wife comes up with this plan. Hey, let's have an open marriage. On Tuesday nights, I'll go out with someone. And if we do the nasty, we do the nasty. You won't know. And then Thursday nights, it's your turn. And we're not allowed to tell each other like names of people, nothing. We're not allowed to tell each other anything. We're gonna sign up on this dating app and that's what we're gonna do. And then it just literally spirals out of control. And it was like this author was like, I'm gonna put in 15 plot twists in this book, when in all reality, it could have probably just had 1 good one. There was so many plot twists in here that some of them literally did not even need to happen. Really quick, I'm gonna spoil this book. I'm gonna put spoilers right here. If you haven't read this book, mute me, okay? If you don't wanna read this book and you just wanna know what I'm gonna say, then just continue on. But I'm gonna pop up spoilers. So, the wife sets the husband up to kill an innocent cop so she can then use that murder as leverage. You know, like, you have to be good to me and stop cheating on me, or I'm gonna tell the police that you murdered this man. So that's what she does. But the thing that really kind of was like, what the hell? You find out that the wife knew all along that he was murdering and raping other women. And she had like a bag of trophies, evidence, and she knew like where it was going. Like, you had all of that leverage to hold over him, but instead you made him go and kill somebody else, and then you took his stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like the author didn't know where she was going with the story and was making stuff up as she went, because it really didn't make sense. And then there was another part of the story where the main chick, like in her inner monologue, as she was like freaking out about the cop knowing her first name, her real name. Then later on in the book is like, yeah, I told him my real name. But it's funny because earlier in the book you were freaking out in your head about it. I just felt like the author wanted to write twist for the sake of writing twist. And for that, no. I gave it 2 stars, and I'm also unhauling that book. And those are all the books that I read in March. I felt like this video was very like, because that's how my brain works. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I do hope that maybe you got something from it. I don't know, maybe a list of books for you not to read. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!